Welcome back to Deep Thoughts, ladies and gentlemen. This is actually a Thursday morning and not a random evening. I'm here at the smoke shop, smoking a little Fuente, a little 858 green label, or green wrapper, rather. I thought today we would go over something that I've been fairly passionate about talking about, which are lost cities. Because I think that there's a couple angles that no one really talks about. I have seen dozens and dozens of specials on TV, from Discovery to Sci-Fi to History Channel, discussing lost cities. Because it's a very enchanting idea for us. Movie series like Indiana Jones are sort of all about finding lost cities, right? Whether they're looking to find a holy grail in that lost city or Excalibur. By the way, when I first moved to Los Angeles, probably a couple of years after I moved to Los Angeles, a friend of a friend was writing the next Indiana Jones. He was working with Spielberg's team and all these other folks, and he was writing it about Excalibur. And then it never happened. Very interesting. But lost cities are the closest thing that we have on Earth of visiting another civilization, sort of on another planet, right? Our dream. What is our dream when it comes to lost cities? Well, we want to find a city that's completely intact, don't we? I mean, you just move that stone, you go down some ivory steps, and, the ultimate fantasy is they're still living there somehow. Or it has been a time capsule, and the amount of spiders in there is very remote. Isn't it funny how we accept spider webs and cobwebs on movie sets as this romantic indicator of, boy, no one's been here in a really long time. But you can go up in your attic or some cellar or something in real life that has not been disturbed for decades, and there's absolutely none of that. But there are spiders down there. It's really funny. I can't remember what... I was watching Stranger Things Season 2, and there's a scene where they go into a building that probably hasn't been visited for at least half a decade, and the place is covered up like it's 900 years old. But it's just really cute how we allowed that to happen, right? Then within lost cities, it's, I could probably call it the Lost City Promise, but within the lost city category, we have places that we discover, like Machu Picchu, where it's in the most remote location you could possibly imagine. It is built out of stones that aren't necessarily from the top of the mountain. And then on top of all that, if those first two accomplishments weren't interesting enough, the craftsmanship exceeds what the natives are able to do today, right? The pre-Inca phase that built Machu Picchu. And then we have the other cities, and like Atlantis. Atlantis is a city that has been discussed by Plato, and it is fascinating how you will watch a 1-hour special about Atlantis, and they don't know anything about the place other than a few kind of loose references about where it is. There's a bunch of loose references about how much more advanced they were than the current population, right? Not more advanced than we are in 2018. By no means. But I'm wondering if something goes deeper than that, because what's fascinating about Atlantis is that, they talk about the circles inside the circles, and but they don't really lament to how advanced they were. They don't talk about flying around the planet. They don't talk about being 7 miles down into the ocean. And I think that we don't put together enough of the kind of basic implications of people talking about this place and what would have really occurred had there been a place like this. And yet man so wants to believe in this that I think that there might be a seed within our hearts that almost beckons back to something that really was like this. And that's kind of esoteric, right? So let me explain that. What if, let's just say, the deep state gets their way, and that would mean that the world would suck. It would be literally THX 1138, fascist, slave-driven world. There is no more art. There's no more expression. There's no comedy. If anything, there's drama and suffering. 99.9% of the world, as the Georgia Guidestones recommends, would be completely wiped off this planet. Some horrible flu, some Zika virus, all this kind of stuff. They get their way. Nobody stands up and knocks them back. Nobody fights them. We all cower down while our neighbors are being destroyed. We just sit here and do nothing until they destroy us. Okay. And this factors in to, I think, the whole mythos of missing cities. And again, I'm talking about cities that really have been missing, lost cities, and I'm talking about the myths of lost cities, which may be real and may not be real. But let's just say that the amazing level of creativity that we have, at least from, I would say, the mid-70s to at least the mid-80s, let's just say that era didn't get extinguished and it kept going, and there's been great things after it, but it definitely has slowed down over time. But let's just say our society for 1,000 years had great comedians, great singers, great bands, great actors, great writers, both poetry and, film and TV. The greatest stuff you love today, your Game of Thrones, there's 20 of those shows over the course of a millennia. And then while we're distracted with our entertainment, we slip. We slip, and these folks finally seize us, right? Maybe they do it through some Skynet robot system, some sociopathic Boston Dynamics Rothschild decides, nobody likes me, I don't get invited to parties, so I'm going to destroy the world with my money. Because there's too many left-brain scientists that can't view the world in any other capacity, they end up inadvertently helping them. But our genes inside of us, even though they're able to overnight pull this off, and even though there is at least 1 or 2 generations that remember the world with art and expression and freedom, we slip into this tyrannical, crazy world, fascist world, enabled by groups like Antifa. And then we start living decade to decade, hundreds of years, century to century, in this horrible world. But because we lived thousands of years before that with freedom and expression and art, our true purpose in being engineered as human beings, we feel it. We're in that world. We're in that world and we feel it. And so there's this weird suspicion in us Wasn't the world different? I can feel it. We didn't used to be in white clothing. We used to wear colors. We used to grow our hair out. We weren't all bald. We didn't work at a factory. I feel like we were outside. I feel like there's this thing called the sun. It's warm and loving instead of these fluorescent lights. We would feel our genetics pushing through that tyrannical barrier. I just think we would. And a part of me is suspicious that maybe these lost cities, including lost technology, might be us hearkening back to a time when we remember the world before monarchies, the world before banks, the world before something as ugly as debt and taxes. We are way too complicit in our own slavery, in my opinion. We accept it because we're born into it, and we're told from the very beginning by our controllers, there are taxes, there is debt. You not only are in debt as an individual, but your family's in debt, your city's in debt, your state's in debt, and your government's in debt. Debt. And what was deemed the most blasphemous behavior 2,000 years ago, which was usury, which was compound interest. You realize a credit card was the most, if you had a credit card back in the time of the fabled myth of Jesus, you had a plastic piece of the devil. And you would be punished more for having that card and being responsible for processing that card than you would be to say that God didn't exist, which was classic definition of blasphemy. I stress this because I think it's fascinating that there are folks that are so addicted to the notion, and I'm not criticizing, by the way. I think it's actually fairly fascinating, and I'm going to tie it to something a little more fascinating, I think, which is why I'm making this show, because I'm not going to teach you anything about Atlantis or Lemuria or any of these lost cities that are more mythos-based than you would learn watching a great documentary on YouTube, a great documentary on the History Channel, or whatever, Discovery, some of Graham Hancock's work, etc. I'm bringing you an angle that I don't think anyone's really talked about ever. If you've ever dove into this lost city realm of research, you will have run into classic members that claim to have channeled spirits from those eras. And there are classic individuals from over 100 years ago that have been claiming to channel these individuals from these foreign locations. And I don't know, we could probably come up with an episode that's just on channeling. I'd have to do a little bit of research as to when someone first started this idea that an individual could start speaking on behalf of a spirit that has already passed. And for those of you who haven't been familiarized with channeling, because you're probably going, what do you mean, changing the channel on the TV? It just means someone who acts as a vessel for a spirit that has moved on. So they get possessed by this spirit that appears to be hanging out somewhere in New Jersey, and they talk about what has happened. Now there's also a couple different types of channeling that I'm familiar with, and the medium, they also call them mediums because the individual's pretty much like the phonographic needle touching the record, and therefore they are the speaker that is bringing through the idea that someone is communicating through them. The first principle of this channeling thing is very, very interesting because it is used to create conspiracy. It is used to create something where there was otherwise nothing. For those of you who have gotten into Planet X and Nibiru, the way that it takes root in the mythos of conspiracy is that someone claims to be channeling alien beings from another planet into this world so we can listen to what they're talking about. It's a very dangerous scam to pull off because you are then responsible for continuing the narrative of great detail, right? If someone sits down in front of me and says they're going to channel someone from Atlantis, I'm going to ask them the most arcane minutia of living in Atlantis. How do you bathe in the morning? What do you eat? If you're on an island, where do you get your food from? Do you eat fish every single day? Do you have livestock out there? What is your mode of transportation? How does it work? Who was the individual that invented that? How about the individual that invented this? What's your neighbor's name? What do you do when you get sick? What medicine do you take? Of course, they're going to say, we never going to think. But you never hear those details. You always hear really broad stroke things, because that's how mythos are created. When people tell me, oh my gosh, have you seen the day-to-day and have you ever read Revelations and it's all coming true? Well, it's pretty easy when it's all pretty generic arcs of life, arcs of society. A bad man's coming and bad things will happen. Well, then you start looking around for something that you can label as bad. And again, if you search out for negativity, you will be given negativity, right? But most of the references to Atlantis were at a time when the Greek universities were at their absolute peak. When you had, people with virtually infinite money talking about these cities that were ancient and gone. It was a tall tale at the time that the stuff was told. One of the sort of oxymorons of these lost cities is that they're supposedly built out of folks that have tremendous capabilities, traveling the world through either airplane or hot air balloon or spaceship. Again, it depends on which person you're talking to, which person claims to have been channeling the truth of this era. But I have this feeling that it is us reaching back into our own genetic past to say, we were amazing. We did have cities that were fantastic. And perhaps something went wrong. We lost control. We trusted people. How did bankers ever get the control over us? How does anyone ever get control over us? At the very inception point, it is us being good and them being evil. So the idea of, let's just say that a channeler knows that they're a complete scam artist. They have found a way to take care of their retirement, which is to sit at home and craft up stories about whatever. And because it's not true at all, they simply have to make it make sense. Don't cross any lines where you contradict yourself. Keep everything fairly generic. Basically take your palm readers and your psychic, cold and hot readers, those techniques that have been around for thousands of years, and simply put them into a narrative of a city. Now, most of us, if we could prove that about someone, we would really frown on that capability, on that not the capability, but on the intent to deceive. They're a scam artist. They're taking people's money. What are they taking? They're taking $19, and it's pretty much fictional entertainment in a book. Maybe if you pay them like Bill Clinton, $500,000 to talk for 20 minutes, then you've been had. But what would drive the person to pick this subject matter in the first place? It may be sheer scam. It may be, hey, I got this little thing here, this little thing I figured out these people are gullible for this lost knowledge. But now you have to have a customer base that's willing to take the risk in believing you, and then you have to have a person who's willing to pursue the scam in the first place. I'd like to suggest that maybe both those individuals, as deluded or as sane as they might be, may simply be tracking back to a history that they remember in their genetics. We were better than this. We were free. We were great. We elected to build pyramids. We built these Stonehenge things. You ever have a feeling that, your life just isn't right? That it shouldn't be the way that it is? I think that's the whole premise of those of us waking up. And I think for hundreds of years, those that have gained control over us through the money changers the bankers that are willing to create these usury algorithms to destroy countries and individuals, they've always been able to sort of, ride the bull effortlessly. As the bull bucks, they're just sitting there. The bull's pretty big, but they're 3 times bigger through power and money. And so they just kind of move their hips a little bit and keep you completely in control. But now the bull has grown. The bull's the size of a city, and they're the size of a human being. And they're getting smaller by the second because we're getting bigger. But there's a part of me that believes that we would have more record of Atlantis on the mainland. People who have been there would come back and draw it. It'd be more than just a slight reference to a place that they heard about a long time ago. Now, part of the logic of having a special society, a lost city or a special city before it's lost, is to keep your anonymity to make sure that the horde doesn't come and take you over. Because regardless of what fortress you might build around your city, you can be overwhelmed by numbers. And so them concealing themselves would be something that would make sense. However, what always happens with organizations like this, once you do achieve something wonderful, something powerful, you typically leave behind clues as to your existence. And it's not necessarily a clue that says, hey, we're here in the ocean. The clue is typically something on the level of, here's a little piece of technology that we feel could improve your life because we want you to gain our abilities, right? I said a long time ago in an episode, I believe in depopulation, that the challenge we have with Africa is that, and there's a little bit of this in South America, but it's very minute in South America. But in Africa, you have a population that has been largely neglected by Europe. And so they have tribes that are literally thousands of years behind modern society. And I mean that by, and it's not a negative thing in all senses, because I think that they're balanced. I think that they wake up, they hunt, they eat, they have a wonderful life, they have rituals and wonderful things. They don't have a clue what nuclear power is built out of. They don't have a clue how to create an integrated, miniaturized microchip. Not a clue. The conception of such a thing is not in their lexicon, in their mind. And again, there's nothing really wrong with that, but if we want to integrate as a society, as a global society, it's going to be a problem. And that's why I think European bankers have chosen many, many years ago, through the exploration of Africa, to say, there's no way to repair this. And so they've kept them in the dark. They've kept them away from modern technology with the intent to make them run an algorithm of having them genocide themselves down as much as possible. And for those that are left, see if we can rehabilitate them up to modern levels, or they'll create some Ebola virus and wipe out the rest of them. I really think that that's what the pasty bankers have in mind for Africa. But what if they weren't in charge? And what if there were beautiful mechanisms that we could drop into a village? A Rubik's Cube, a pyramid, something very simple that would start making the minds of those tribal people think a little bit up. They start thinking more mathematically. You find out that there are some recessive genes that maybe are related to the Egyptians. They start to grow. There's an African tribe somewhere down there that they're not exactly like your paint your face tribe, but they have built, faux spaceships. They want to move in. They want to start exacerbating aerospace research. They don't have any resources. So they're cannibalizing cars, and they're making like a little space shuttle. It's just a toy. But the intent is there. The interest is there. But no one's really helping them because there's this other blanket plan on top of them. But again, you watch a whole series on TV or the internet about Atlantis, and when you talk about empirical evidence of things that people have written about Atlantis without channeling, physical evidence of its existence, there's virtually nothing. And it's amazing to me that they can actually greenlight a show where the producers are going, what do you have on Atlantis now? Plato talked about this and that and this. And we got a few people that say they channel old spirits. You can make this an hour? Oh, yeah, totally. Okay, especially with commercials, 45 minutes long. Oh, okay. Now, what's fascinating about my personal history with this is that I didn't really hear about Atlantis until probably the 80s because of my age. I was in my mid-teens in the mid-80s. Now that I've grown up and I've read about folks that have said they've been channeling this since the 1800s, if not before, the talk about Atlantis goes back a long way. But it wasn't until the 90s, and probably with the proliferation of the internet, that I ever heard about something called Lemuria, which was essentially the yang to the yin that was Pacific-based. A Pacific-based society with pretty much the same exact story of Atlantis. It's a rinse and repeat algorithm in terms of my personal opinion of someone saying, gosh, we really milked this Atlantis thing. I mean, again, unless someone starts channeling some nice Isaac Asimov or Philip K. Dick or Robert Heinlein fiction about this place, we're not going to have another series on TV about this. We've sort of blown our wad. We can maybe redo it in 10 years when the CG gets better. We can go back through our evidence and rehash it one more time, but we need a whole nother story, and someone goes, oh, I got it. Now, Lemurian talk goes back, again, way before the 90s, of course. But I feel like that algorithm happened back then when they got tired of talking about Atlantis. But what makes lost cities intriguing? As I've said, I think that we yearn for the promise that we're going to find these cities, be them underwater or underground, or in the most fanciful case, like some King Kong island, and boy, it's right there. And inside there, we're going to find the cure to cancer. We're going to find our balls, By that I mean we find our courage to fight what we already know is wrong with our world. I think that's pathetic, right? We know what's wrong with our world. We know who's making our world suck. And we are hating on the one individual who's trying to change that. At least a lot of people are, because they're so duped, aren't they? I think, genetically speaking, every single human being that reaches any level of sentient awareness, you think, therefore you are, you can feel the memory inside you of a time before all of this. Now, was it all a bowl of cherries? Hell no. There was always famine. There was law of the jungle. But I think that depending on who we're talking about and when we're talking about and where we're talking about, you might be very, very surprised to just realize for a second that things were balanced at one point. Graham Hancock has made some wonderful statements about the pyramids, and he is very angered by the notion that someone would say that the pyramids were made by a slave culture, and I have to agree with him 1,000%. And his main pivotal moment and pivotal fact, which I had not put together until I heard him say this, was that he goes, the Great Pyramid, which is very different than the other two, out of the three that are in the Giza Plateau, it was built with love. It was built with precision. Everyone participating in the creation of the Great Pyramid had to be concentrating. It is a work of art. And, again, for those of you who don't know, there's 3 pyramids on the Giza Plateau, and there's hundreds of pyramids all over Egypt. And I think that most of them have a little bit of this reality I'm about to illustrate to you. But the Great Pyramid, the internal rocks are on a slant. They actually slant inward to the center of the pyramid. And it's only the outer veneer, the outer rocks, that actually have this, looks like it just was stacked up. This slanting of the rocks is a very interesting decision because it makes building the Great Pyramid far more complicated. One, it vectors a lot of the force of the rocks towards the center, which means the rocks that are in the dead center of this pyramid are taking on an amazing load. Tons and tons of pressure from the other rocks. Now, when you put them level to the ground, well, then the stress is just going straight down. And big, giant rocks are built to take the force above, right? But when you slant them, you create almost a vector of sort of linear torque right towards the center. It just gets exponentially more intense towards the center, which is why some of the rocks have started to crack because of the pressure so great. But as Graham Hancock noted, he said, look, what you have to understand is this is a massive, massive structure. And it's funny, I have a book on the pyramids that misquotes the height of the pyramids. According to Graham Hancock, the height of the Great Pyramids 480 feet. The book I read said 453 feet or something like that. So I'm going to go with Graham's estimations because he's been there several times. So over 480 feet tall. That's huge, right? 2.5 million rocks, roughly. It's an estimate from 2.3 to 2.5 million rocks. He said, look, if you made a mistake at the bottom of one of these pyramids, then the top isn't going to come out at all. It's going to go wrong, and it's going to go wrong really fast. But they're as perfect as could be made. And they're aligned to due north. They have pi built into their measurements. You can derive the circumference and the diameter of the earth from the measurements of the Great Pyramid. That's important. So what society could get along long enough to create not only one of these things, but literally hundreds of these things all over the area of Egypt? Bent pyramids, which were classified as mistakes, that they had the angle wrong and that they simply corrected it after they went up a certain distance, realized they weren't going to have a nice pyramid at the top, and so they changed their pyramid shape. That's a complete lie, because there's dozens and dozens of bent pyramids. There are massive pyramids that are so big they're mistaken for mountains. Small mountains, but mountains nonetheless, made by man. This isn't a slave culture. This is a culture that got along. And I'm going to suggest thousands of people over thousands of years got along. And I think that this might be the rudimentary archetype of our past that drives us to want to look back in the first place, to find where we went wrong. The whole, the adage of, to not know history is to repeat it. Imagine a child looking into a phone every 30 seconds because they're taught this is how you get your little fix, your little dopamine drop. Boom, boom, boom. How could they possibly hang on to a thought that has any length to it, any dimension to it? They can't understand history if you told it to them, because the cavities in their brain, their neural net, is a bunch of shallow connections. And the amount of memory and depth necessary to hold a deep thought, it just is genetically not possible. So the reason why I go down this route is to say that those who are claiming to channel may simply be dealing with their own psychosis of need to dig up this history. To say, I feel it, and I'm going to make this up. And maybe they're not completely making it up. They might be making up specific names, specific instances, but perhaps they are tuning themselves to our past and simply saying, I am going to channel the overall feeling that we used to have, and I will put a little fiction on top of this. But what I'm really trying to do, and I support some of this, is to reignite in mankind that there was a time when we were advanced and we were good. Yeah, there's a little coveting going on, a little bit of hiding their location because, they can get overrun and then bad things happen. And then the people that want to believe the channelers are often frowned upon by those of us who don't believe these locations may have or may not have existed specifically. But all they're trying to do is get back to their past too. They feel it in their chest. I talk about on this show the fact that, the religions of the world that have a virgin birth and they have a Messiah that comes down and lives a little while and then dies and is resurrected. It's the sun that is born. Okay, think about the sun in the sky too. It provides light and information and health, and we understand where we are. It dies, which is nighttime. We go into panic because we don't have the information of light anymore, unless it's a full moon. All the predators of the world, your leopards and what have you that can see beautifully at night, tear our families apart. And it's only when the sun is reborn again, resurrected in the morning, do we get back this information and this light. And it's glorious. And imagine you're a caveman. You don't understand the heliocentric models of the universe or whatever you think this place is. Doesn't matter, really. So the birth, death, and resurrection is simply the sun going up and down and providing information for us to grow and us to protect ourselves. That is the base format of the human condition that then, when retold through a mythos, seems real. Well, of course, there's just something absolutely truthful about this whole story. And you can call the sun Jesus, or you can call him Tamos, you can call him Cuchulainn, but there are, I believe, 23 virgin birth messiahs. There's a reason the story keeps getting told. Now, when we start finding the cities that we do find, lost cities that are real, and Graham Hancock has done a tremendous effort on these lost cities. The pyramids of China, right? The the Inca pyramids down south in South America. You got pyramids down there the size of true mountains, and we haven't begun to acknowledge that they exist in the public light. So strange. If we really wanted to know where we have been, we'd have to excavate, millions of metric tons of topsoil to reveal these amazing creations. Machu Picchu. And even though Stonehenge was reconstructed in 1954, completely moved from where they found the stones to where they actually placed them. So when you go there, you're looking at a facsimile of what was there. The stones were carved by someone a long time ago and put in a little circle. Now, whether or not they're druid-based or whatever is all probably complete crap. Maybe it's true, maybe it's not. But they usurped it. There you go. There are temples all over Africa and Turkey. How many people were completely blown away when they saw Indiana Jones Part 3, when he goes into that little cove and finds that beautiful building that was carved out of the mountainside? If you look at the real evidence of that area, they have carved, there's a bunch of those in that same area. There's literally I don't even know how many. I saw at least 6 where they had been carving that face over and over and over again until they got it right. And the one that they use in the movie is the most correct one. But if you pay attention to it, it has some proportional issues. It's still a little distorted, right? But it's still a magnificent creation for man. Someone went and saw, I guess, Rome. Came back and said, well, we could probably, I find, we dig out this sandstone. It's really pliable. Just as long as we don't dig out, because you can't put it back. You got to be real careful. And they figured out a way to carve sort of a Roman, Greek, Egyptian column-based facade into a mountain. I don't even know if you call that a mountain. A crevasse built of, I guess, some fairly strong but pliable stone. But in this episode, I want you to focus on your own internal yearnings for this information. I think a first pass of this sort of feeling from some sort of new take from perhaps a philosopher, a psychologist, they may blow the whole thing off, but also acknowledge the arc of saying, you just want things to be better in your life. You want things to be simple in your life. And so you're willing to go to Disneyland and say, I want this to be real. I want to live in Disneyland. Or you play a video game. How many times have some of you guys played video games and you definitely had the thought, I'd like to live here for at least a little while. I'd like to try this reality out. A World of Warcraft world, where you can kind of play around and there's a little bit of comedy in there. It's not some crazy StarCraft bloodbath or some Diablo, visitation to Satan. But you get to be the hero, right? How many of us watch movies? We're like, gosh, it'd be nice to be in that world. It's such a fundamental thing that, there's a game called Fallout, which is a post-apocalyptic, nuclear era they detonated all the bombs, they had the war, and it's over. And it's in this apocalyptic world where you have raiders and scavengers that will kill you to take your stuff. But when you play it, if you're a guy, I will say this much, I don't think a lot of women play this game, there's a point where you may say, and I've had this feeling myself, at least there's no taxes. At least there's no bankers. At least there's no politicians lying to me constantly. At least there's no television trying to sell me something I don't need. Yeah, it's a rough world, but some of us dudes are like, yeah, just give me a pair of jeans, a leather jacket, and some boots and a gun. Maybe my dog, and we'll roll the dice, right? The reality is we shouldn't be having those feelings. I mean, honestly, we shouldn't want to roll the dice into a post-apocalyptic radioactive world, but we do sometimes. We shouldn't want to leave our particular reality. We should want to make it better. My writing teacher says that, fictional things must exist for man for one very specific reason. That life isn't enough. That living this life has been so distorted by marketing departments, by repression and oppression, that we need fictional stories to create some escape so that we can be happy. And I don't think he's talking about this from the perspective that this is the way it should be. I think he's just simply noting, ever since governments grew, so did the plays and the poems and the stories, the songs. If you go back to Greece, you have to study the idea that the playwrights back in those days were often murdered. The actors were murdered. And why were they murdered? They would put on a play making fun of the government, exposing the government corruption. And then the people from time to time, way back in pre-Greece, would rise up and change the government. And eventually the government said, we're going to hire some mercenaries to kill these people, to get rid of the resistance that we hate so much. And this went on for a long time. And then when Greece lost control to Rome, under the auspices of the Flavius family, the Titus Flavius Caesar, created something called the Colosseum. And what they were able to do is create a similar form of entertainment with no intellectual capacity required. A sport. Push someone in the middle, have them eaten by a tiger. Push a weak man and a strong man in there, a gladiator and a citizen who's being punished for whatever reason. Maybe they were a thief. Maybe they simply raised their voice against the state. And the gladiator beats them down until they're dead. And according to history, which may or may not be true, the audience roared. And this is what we have today. It's called sports. You're not focusing on any issues. You absolutely positively do not need an intellectual bone in your body. Maybe baseball, maybe cricket, to sit and watch a game for 36 hours, right? But most sports don't require you to have a bone in your body of any intellectual capacity whatsoever, which is why a lot of times when you find a person who can quote you stats after stats of their favorite sport, they're probably, in my opinion, they are some of the easiest sort of human fodder for the canon of demise that we have on this planet. They don't have any deep thoughts. They don't. They see NFL people kneeling, who, when you interview them, why are you kneeling, their answer changes drastically, day to day. Not realizing that they're millionaires, a lot of them 100 millionaires, and they could take their money and go do a public service announcement if they have something to protest. But that's beyond their intellectual capacity. So what do the lost cities offer us today? Let's say that they existed. Let's say that Atlantis existed. Well, even the fabled recollections of its existence make it a fairly small location, which means the population would be small. The amount of real estate to live and manufacture inventions would be very small. We have never found evidence of flying vehicles that were made by human beings that go back very far at all. The Egyptians are well known for having things that are discovered, right? A boat is discovered in a quarry that was being built, and it has an amazing design, but it's still a seafaring boat that can't do a lot of deep sea, and I don't mean down under the water, but way out in the middle of the Atlantic sort of travel. It's still a coastal boat by most estimations, and that's estimated based on its propulsion system or lack thereof, and it's also estimated on how many people it takes to operate the boat and how much spare space is in the hull to supply them with food. We had to surmount all of these issues, come up with a better sail structure, and to be able to move across the ocean with a very light sail, a very light wind power versus massive wind power. And if you've ever taken up sailing, it's an art in the smallest boat. We had all the scurvy and the weird, tooth decay and gum decay until we figured out how to take certain citrus fruits, the limes, right? The limey bastards. Remember that whole thing? To preserve health over what is, probably a month-long journey in these older boats, right? We think about flying ships from time to time. And I think it's fairly safe to say we wouldn't have made a flying boat out of limestone rock or out of any of the rocks that were used to make Machu Picchu. So even though we're seeing brilliant craftsmanship, and I mean off-the-chain craftsmanship that seems to take into account earthquakes and stability and all these things, we don't have any evidence that the Mayans, for instance, who seem to create this beautiful artwork of individuals taking off in these ships, looks like a little astronaut guy. We don't have, a quarry or a location where we start to see complex metals, very lightweight metals that could hold a crew and provide a life support system and get off the ground. We don't see any of that. We have found the little clock, the sort of beautiful timepiece that was discovered in the Mediterranean Sea that dates back to, again, like 0 AD or before, that seems to have provided a tremendous advancement on sailing the world. It seems like this timepiece is capable of measuring longitude and latitude, something that wasn't completed until the mid-1800s in modern, quote-unquote, history. Now, some of you will probably have studied the idea of a great reset, where we did have all of this, and simply it all rotted into the ground. Now, in my various research projects for screenplays that I've written, I did talk to individuals about what would last the longest on Earth. What could you possibly create that would last through an ice age? Let's just say we believe that. And they said rocks. Rocks is really the only thing that you could possibly carve up that could possibly survive any multiple thousands of years going by, multiple millennia going by. The Ice Age is very interesting because I don't believe that they actually happen, for one. It's one of these out of sight, out of mind theories. When I started to study why they believe that ice ages occurred, is kind of a twofold system. We study glaciers today, and glaciers grow and glaciers shrink. We can go multiple places in the world and watch glaciers move, and they are unbelievably massive, and they move, and they churn the earth underneath, and they are, you're talking about, a couple miles deep of ice that weighs unfathomable amounts of tons, and they are crushing whatever's down there. Soft metals, man, it's going to be atomized down below. So if you thought you had New York City all pinned down such that historians could never lose sight of it, if a glacier were to create itself over New York and roll over it, like we see in the North Pole or the South Pole, it's gone. It's crushed out of existence. Now, that may not be an absolute. There may be a girder that makes it through. It rolls. It gets locked in a ravine, and for whatever reason, it doesn't get pulverized. The other big claim of ice ages is that rocks, big giant rocks, are tumbled. And the geologists of the world, believe that they have proven that these tumbled rocks are all over the world's surface, and therefore the whole world is pretty much covered in ice in some cyclical basis of, depending on who you ask, every 25,000 years or so, this natural cycle occurs. The idea that the Earth somehow gets itself out of whack with the sun to the degree that we have these extreme freezing and thawing processes doesn't make any sense to me whatsoever. What would make, let's just go with the heliocentric thing for a while, what on earth would make us lose this relationship with the big ball of fire in the sky when we are always in a descending orbit around our sun, meaning it gets closer to the sun, and whatever infinitesimal amount it is, it gets closer to the sun. So we should never be getting cold to the extent that the oceans freeze up. There's the other miscalculation, which is to say that we have enough ocean to do this. It's all going to suck up on top of the continents and start crushing the continents. I don't buy it. But when you're told this, what does it do to your mind? It simply says that, well, whatever we have on this side of the last ice age is all that could exist, because an ice age erases absolute. Now, they don't really claim that the equators get this sort of pulverizing experience, to my knowledge. Correct me if you know different with the claims. That might explain, if you do believe in these things, and let's just say they did exist, why the Giza plateaus can last tens of thousands of years, way past any claimed ice age cycle, because they are never touched by the glaciers in the first place. But what I think is interesting is, and I found this research in a different path, was that these rolling rocks actually could have come out of the absolute bowels of the earth. That it's a very natural process of, magma forming and rolling into existence. It doesn't have to be the byproduct of ice. They tell you that the Grand Canyon is made from ice, when if you just use expanding Earth algorithm, you can put it all back together. If you look at any, and I forgot to mention this in the expanding Earth episode, but if you look at most rivers in the entire world, one side matches the other side. It looks like a tear in the earth. A tear due to an expanding center that is simply fracturing it. It's as if you took a balloon and you blew it up 1/4 and you painted it with a very light coating of paint, and then you continued blowing it up after it dried. And you blew it up 4 times the amount. It's true full size. Well, right off the bat, you can do your math and say it's going to have Most likely 3/4 empty space without paint. And that is your ocean base. Now, some cities, most of the lost cities that we have discovered, and lost only means that we didn't know that they were there, and we found them. We usually classify them as interesting because they tend to have some architectural or fabrication reality that blows our mind. Again, Machu Picchu, amazing. The pyramids in Egypt, amazing. The pyramids in China, amazing. The lost city off the coast of Japan that Graham Hancock and his wife filmed, these big, giant slabs of rocks that must have supported some sort of civilization. They're definitely man-made, and they have steps that have been carved, as if, at one point, the ocean was much shallower, and these steps were revealed, and they were built by people trying to create a society. What's interesting about it is, to my knowledge, there aren't land-based cities in Japan that match the ones that are off the coast. So it was like there was this giant shift in architectural theory. Perhaps the rocks don't exist inside the land, and that's why they don't do it. I think that's pretty fascinating. Why did the Chinese build pyramids and then never build pyramids again? It's as if whatever civilization did that moved on. But they buried a bunch of soldiers, sculpted soldiers, in the base of one of the pyramids. Very strange. Did the pyramids get built first, and then someone found it and decided, hey, let's put these soldiers underneath? Was it a crude way to simply put a bunch of rocks on something to protect it? You can't put anything underneath the pyramids of Giza because there's a giant plateau underneath made of limestone. So what do we do with these little fragments of information about our ancient history? Well, luckily, the majority of the stories are real. They really are places that we've gone. For Atlantis and Lemuria, well, keep searching. I'm willing to bet with the amount of radar information that we have and radar map information, or I should say even satellite images or high altitude images. I have a family member that works in high altitude mapping technology. She manages the imagery from independent companies to create maps for government rescue missions. So like when Katrina's doing its thing, she works with these independent companies to find the data and connect the maps together so they can respond to it. When flights disappear, they can be used to search for flights that disappear and all kinds of stuff. So for those of you who question the existence of satellites, there are companies that provide this service, and I find it very hard to believe that they are using high altitude planes to capture all of these images. So whatever you think satellites are, there's something up there, and they take pictures, and it's a big business, and there's multiple companies that do it. So the idea that Atlantis is out there for you to discover, I think most people have conceded that if it does exist, it would be sort of a blemish on the bottom of the ocean, hidden in plain sight, eroded by time, and therefore has limited value to us. I think that we need to acknowledge in us that if you're sitting around waiting for a rescue, that's probably not the attitude you want, because it's probably not coming. And it's very similar to the story that I've said a couple times on various shows, which is we have experimented, millionaires have experimented, sociological experiments where they took people from Africa, from tribes, and brought them to New York and put them in suites and let them live and tried to integrate them into modern society, claiming that there is no real gap. It's sort of that Trading Places storyline where you can take anyone from the ghetto and move them into this aristocracy, and someone from the aristocracy into the ghetto, and they will simply trade behaviors. Now, within that particular example, I actually think that might actually work to a degree. But as I had it described to me, they go back to the suite, And these individuals, because they have not been trained, all right, they turned it into a jungle. They didn't know how to use a blender, a TV, a sofa, a bed. These aren't things that they natively have where they came from. And so even though they were given the promise, as we may have imposed on them, even though they live probably a very fine life where they are, we weren't ready. So let's say you find Atlantis and it's in a pristine condition. It's inside a mountain or something. Or you find the byproduct of their inventions in some other location in the world that isn't where Atlantis was. If it is truly all the answers that you're looking for, what's that going to do to your taxes? What's that going to do to your repression and your oppression? Is it going to make GMO foods go away? Fluoride go away? Aspartame go away? Nope. Is it going to take the cell phones out of the hands of your child? No. It's not going to do any of that. You're going to have to own your own mind and your own paradigm of change. You have to. But man doesn't want to hear that. We want a promise. And that's the fascination, I believe, of the lost cities. Some folks just want to get off on how smart was man before today. And I will tell you that I think I know how smart we were. And it has nothing to do with spaceships, technology of any kind. I think that those exist. I think that the Egyptians potentially were healing themselves with frequencies of energy. But I don't think they probably got that sick. They didn't eat things that were against the human body, like pure sugars. They didn't OD on things. They weren't obese. For any of you who are absolutely religious about brushing your teeth every day, and I suggest you continue in this culture for sure, you have pharaohs living to be in their 90s that died with all of their teeth in their head. We find their skulls, man, and we find tens of thousands of skulls of Romans and Greeks that were actually buried in the Egyptian tombs, all with their teeth, because they didn't have the candy bars that we have and the ice cream that we have today. I think you feel me. The promise that we're looking for is something we're going to actually have to work for. It's in our brains. And it's carried through the medium of indoctrination and propaganda, through television, through the internet, through film, through little memes that we tell each other. Again, when we say things like, well, everyone dies of cancer, everything causes cancer, it's simply not true. It's a man-made defect. It's a man-made disease, and it didn't exist like it exists today. And I'm willing to bet 200 years ago, the kind of cancer you got was because the individuals that were getting it were perhaps doing something that wasn't natural, burning coal and breathing it, playing around with uranium bricks, because it's a neat heavy rock that's warm, changing the food supply from its native food supply of whatever food groups they're supposed to be eating and neglecting some certain nutritional supplement and dying of it. There was a reason why sailors were so mystified why their teeth were falling out, while their legs got bowed the more they spent time on the sea, thinking that they could not eat what they were eating on land. It's food. I ate food. I was hungry. I supplanted the hunger in my stomach with something. Why am I suddenly sick? Not realizing that there's a nutritional regimen that they must engage in to stay healthy. While things were good, we trusted our leaders, and our leaders stabbed us in the back. Not that many. Again, it's just a few at the top. A few that control the mechanisms by which we value money, currency of any kind. And I'll just close with this statement, which for the listeners, the common listeners of the show, this is me preaching to you, and you already know this. For those of you who are new, welcome to the club. And for all of you This is something that I think you need to embed in your own life and pass on to others. Any faction on earth that lobbies to get rid of the checks and balances, which is an average population working together to create a balanced society, to create representation of each individual group. Go see my episode on politics, which isn't as much about politics as a simulation of a bunch of people on an island building a society. That's what the episode is really about. Any group that's trying to centralize power under a group of human beings on Earth, any group that's doing that, is a group that is creating this super divide between what used to be balanced and wonderful and happy and this world that makes you look for the promises of UFOs and aliens landing to solve all of our problems, a lost city that is full of all the technology that will undo all of the problems that we have today. What if the only thing you ever found in a lost city was a tome that told a story about how there was no debt, about how there was no money? It's a Gene Roddenberry story of how to live in a balanced world. There was equality for everyone. There were no birth defects. Races, well, who cares what color you are? Can you lift that rock? Well, that rock needs to be lifted. Lift it. I don't care if you're a female or a male. I don't care if you're gay or straight. It doesn't matter. That rock needs to be lifted. I'm lifting a rock over here. This dude over here or this girl over here is carving the rock up so that we can use it for a very specific purpose. What if the tome merely said we're being nice to each other? That's how everything is so perfect. That's why Atlantis was famous. That's why Lemuria was famous. Yeah, we had some hot air balloons. We moved around. Well, guess what? We already have that technology. We don't need to find another way to travel on Earth. We can get anywhere on this planet to another place on this planet by buying vehicles and tickets to do so. We don't need that information. And, for those of you who want to explore space, that is another frontier of promise. We can go to another planet. We can go off-world and get away from these governments and this taxation. Just like the settlers who came in from Europe, who conquered the United States of America, they loved Dodge City and Deadwood and Tombstone because there was no law. They could do whatever they wanted. There's pluses and minuses in all categories. As I've said several times on this show, now that we're aware, a lot of us are aware, and the snowball's getting bigger, the overall consciousness of corruption is starting to spread at a rapid pace. There's really no excuse for us not to, one, spread this information to others, and two, to make the changes in our own personal lives for ourselves and for our families to correct all of this chaos. It's happening on our watch. For any of you who revel in revolutions that changed your world, the Americans, well, we had a 27-year war called the Revolution, where we fought off the European monarchy so that we could have this idea that we call America of true freedom, no fascism, no socialism. We had common law, do no harm. That's it. It was all based on something that happened in Europe called Magna Carta, which the second it was passed, go see my episode on Magna Carta, the king, or the follow-up king, started taxing the people. And the people said, we don't like these taxes. And he said, well, if you loosen up your rights inside Magna Carta, I'll reduce the taxes. He manipulated them right back into the serfdom that they had just escaped. But because they had nearly 1,000 years of the Inquisition pounding a fake religion into their mind, they were very, very capable of being molded one more time. It just takes one generation to lose all the progress of hundreds of generations before them. But how is that done? It's done through choking education, choking the algorithms of history. In this world, we are forced to learn about the Holocaust. And why are we forced to learn about the Holocaust? Well, there's a lot of reasons why we're forced to learn about the Holocaust, but the overall general accepted arc is so that it never happens again. Well, there are many things that we are allowing to happen right now that are far worse than any Holocaust you've ever heard about in your life in any history. And I would say compound interest, usury, and credit card debt is probably 1,000,000 times worse than any Holocaust you could possibly conceive of. because it removes all happiness from the world. It rides on you like a demon on your back. It destroys the quality of all life. You've been taught that someone should be able to make money off helping you, make a profit off helping you. We need to build humans that just want to help each other. We need to help those who don't want to work because they've just been beaten down. They've had a horrible hand dealt to them. We need to figure out a way to reinvigorate their purpose to live, which is their love. I think you feel me. For those of you who haven't gone to deepthoughtsradio.com, you should probably go. There's audio and video. There's a locked Facebook group link, and there's a Patreon connection there. I've been pushing Patreon more often now because it would be cool to do this full time, wouldn't it? It would take a lot of you. I'm starting to put up a lot of exclusive content on there. I shouldn't say a lot just yet. By the time you see this, it might be true. I'm going to start releasing these videos on Patreon before I release them on YouTube or any other format. And for those of you who have been so kind to donate on that particular platform, you need to make sure you click the notification bell mechanism on that site, because I'll post and none of you get updated as to the new post. I've just realized I got a notification that no one's being notified, so you guys aren't realizing the exclusive content's up there. Anyhow, if you made it to the end, thank you so much. Take care of yourself and someone else, and I'll see you in the next Deep Thoughts. Over now.